I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstream gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I'm starting a series titled The Executions Commence. And what has brought this series on? We've discussed in the past on this podcast that when Governor Jeff Landry was elected, one of the things that he pledged to do was hold those accountable that were sentenced to capital punishment in the state of Louisiana. And it appears that the pledge is being seen through, as death warrants have been signed for several individuals locked up in Bloody Angola and sentenced to death. Now, what I'm going to do with this series is I'm going to cover the crime, conviction, and the date of execution for each of these individuals. And our first subject is Jessie Hoffman, whose death warrant has been signed and his date of execution set for March 18th, just really right around the corner. Now, we're going to start off in November 27th of 1996, and a couple in New Orleans on the east side of New Orleans found some clothing and some other items belonging to Molly Elliott in a vacant lot near a highway known as Powers Junction. Now, they turned those items over to the police, and in addition to that, they had found 3 ATM receipts, and police were able to trace those ATM receipts to a Regions Bank in New Orleans. Now, at the time, the people who found those items were told that officers were too busy to respond, so they took the items to the 7th District headquarters, and this was the day before Thanksgiving. Sadly, the next day, on November 28th of 1996, Thanksgiving morning, Molly's body had also been found in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, which is about a half hour or so from New Orleans. And shout out to those people who went way above and beyond what most people would do when they find discarded items, a few pieces of clothing and some ATM receipts, and they went through all this trouble to make sure not only the police were aware of it, but also that they had possession of it. And unbeknownst to them at the time, those items would become a key part of a death penalty case. So just quickly, a little bit of history about Molly Elliott, whose body was found in St. Tammany Parish. She was 28 years old, and she lived in Covington, Louisiana, which is about a half hour from the Crescent City. She was actually from California, but she accepted a job in Louisiana, and that was just 2 years before she was found deceased. And she was married to a guy by the name of Andrew Elliott. He was from Dallas, Texas, and neighbors, they described that couple as just awesome people. Molly Elliott in particular was very outgoing, very bubbly, very vibrant, just a fun person to be around. So at the time that couple was reporting the clothing that they found and those ATM receipts, and just prior to Molly Elliott's body being found, her husband, Andrew, had actually filed a missing persons report. This was about 10 a.m. on Thanksgiving Eve. Molly had failed to come home. He first did what you would normally do when she didn't show up. He starts calling friends and relatives and asking them if they had heard from her, and unfortunately, no one had. The next morning, Thanksgiving morning, November 28th of 1996, a duck hunter who was hunting in St. Tammany Parish on a makeshift dock by what's known as the Pearl River, he finds the body of Missy Elliott. And Missy had been shot with a single bullet in the head. Later that day, and again, this is Thanksgiving Day, her husband Andrew had to identify her body. I just could not imagine that. And police, they do what they do. They start investigating, and they discover that Molly Elliott was last seen leaving her office on Camp Street in New Orleans. This was on November 27th of 1996, and that she had plans to meet her husband at his office in Marrero, another outskirt of New Orleans. And they were going to go to dinner in New Orleans before returning back home. Now, this is where those ATM receipts that were found by the couple that turned them into police, this is where they really came into play, because police had those ATM receipts fresh in their mind, and they remembered from the bank cards that were found with that discarded clothing, the name Molly Elliott. So the first thing they did, they go straight to that Regions Bank. And Regions Bank, they supply police with some videotape footage of the ATM area, and it showed Molly withdrawing money while standing next to an African-American male, wearing a jacket with the word valet on it. And investigators recognized that jacket right away as a jacket worn by valets working at the Sheraton Hotel in downtown New Orleans. And it was also where Molly would regularly park her car, which was a 1991 Nissan 240 SX. So they head to the Sheraton Hotel in New Orleans, and they talk to the big boss man at the Sheraton Hotel who's in charge of all those valets. And the manager mentions that during the time period that Molly was seen on that video footage, only one employee was on break, and that was 18-year-old Jessie Hoffman. Now, in the meantime, while police are speaking to that manager, Molly's car was found abandoned in the French Quarter. So in short order, police haul Hoffman in for questioning. This was on November 29th of 1996, just a day after Molly Elliott's body had been found. Hoffman was picked up at a housing project in New Orleans. And when police asked Hoffman his whereabouts during the relevant time, he first indicated that he left for work and took a bus to New Orleans East so that he could deliver some medication to his girlfriend. But police, they were suspicious about this story because it kind of branched out from there and got a little ridiculous. He then said while on the way to deliver medicine to his girlfriend, two African-American males forced him into a car at gunpoint. And he got into the car and he noticed a white female in the back of the car with a towel over her head. Now stick with me. He then claimed that the men drove them to an ATM and forced the woman to withdraw money while the defendant stood next to her. And his claim got even more ridiculous and strange. He said after driving a long distance, the man stopped the car near a bridge and he told Hoffman to, quote, "Fuck this bitch or I'll kill you and your girlfriend, Rosanna," which he wasn't specific at the time on how they even knew who his girlfriend was. But obviously, because this story is total bullshit, the police didn't buy it. But he continues on with this bullshit story. He said he complied and he was forced to have sex with Molly, who, according to Hoffman, was then let out of the car. And as you can imagine, the truth never changes, and his story changed a million times, which indicates it was total bullshit. And in his change story, he said one of the men that was armed with a gun actually walked off with Molly when she got out of the car. He said he never heard any gunshots, but the man came back alone. He then claimed the two men dropped him off and he took a bus back to work and didn't even report it. Now, obviously, he's lying, and it's obvious to me that he spun the story to explain a lot of things that he knew police would find. He's assuming if they buy the story, it would explain why police would find his DNA on her. That's why he said he was, quote, forced to have sex with her. He also brought up the fact that he was forced to be outside that ATM with Molly, which would explain the videotape. I mean, this dude was reaching because he knew he was fucked, because in reality, what he did was rob, rape, and murder a good human being in Molly Elliott. So police continue to question Hoffman. And in his videotape statement, he admits during the questioning that he kidnapped, robbed, raped, shot, and killed Molly Elliott. And it was at this time that Hoffman was held at the St. Tammany Parish Jail, and he got no bond. And this was big news. So you can believe that cameras were there. He actually appeared startled when he was confronted by a television camera as he was escorted into the back of a patrol car, and flat out refused to answer any questions. Probably the smartest thing that he did during this whole ordeal. So reporters, they then contact Molly Elliott's husband, Andrew, for a statement. And he said, quote, "This is all just too painful. I'm just not ready to speak about it and have no statement at this time," unquote. And who could blame this guy? So on January 8th of 1997, a St. Tammany Parish grand jury, they indict Jessie Hoffman on first-degree murder in the murder of Molly Elliott. And evidence is introduced at the trial showing that Hoffman kidnapped Molly at gunpoint in her own car as she was leaving that Sheraton parking garage after Molly's long day at work. And in the ATM videotape footage, you can see the terror. You can actually see it on Molly's face as she withdraws that money from her account. It's written all over her that something very horrible has happened. And if you're curious, it was $200 that was withdrawn from that ATM. And when police spoke with Hoffman's girlfriend, she indicated they went shopping soon after. And guess what? Hoffman paid cash for several items. Wonder where he got that cash from. Of course, after Molly withdrew the money, Hoffman forced her back into the car, then still at gunpoint, and told her to drive to a remote area in St. Tammany Parish. On the way, according to Hoffman, Molly begged him not to hurt her, and he answered that he would not because she was cooperating. Hoffman even said that Molly offered herself to Hoffman while begging him not to hurt her, which personally, I don't believe it. And I guess he figured that his claim that she offered herself to him would allow him to escape a rape charge. I mean, this guy is obviously a total dumbass, right? So Hoffman and Molly, they arrive at a secluded section of St. Tammany Parish, just north of Lake Pontchartrain, where he brutally rapes her. So even after kidnapping, robbing, and raping Molly, all of which were done at gunpoint, Hoffman still didn't let her go, as we now know. Instead, he forced her, still at gunpoint, while she was completely nude, to get out of the car, march down a dirt path that was overgrown with vegetation, and in an area that was used as a dump site for local people, just full of trash. He tells her to get down on her knees, and he shoots her point blank in the head, execution style. And it's believed that Molly likely survived for a few minutes after being shot, but she was left on that dock completely nude on a cold November evening to die alone. Hoffman then disposed of her belongings, which we now know were the belongings turned in by that couple, and he goes back to work after his break. And his boss noted that he was very late from that break, showing up actually 2.5 hours late. So what happens a lot of times with these high-profile cases is the defense will typically ask the court to change the venue in which the defendant is tried, and this case is no exception. The defense files for a change of venue request, but the judge in this case ruled against that change, saying that out of 100 potential jurors, fewer than 10 could recall anything about the case. It needed to stay there, and I would agree with that. And then in June of 1998, that trial finally takes place. A forensic pathologist by the name of Fraser McKenzie, he testified that Molly did indeed survive for 15 minutes after that bullet struck her head. The fisherman who found her body also testified, and he said that her head was near the water, her hair was wet, and he saw all of this, jumped into his truck, went to the nearest store, and called 911. It was obvious to him that she was dead. The state presented DNA evidence linking Hoffman directly to the crime, along with Hoffman's videotape statement. And although the defense never contested that Hoffman shot Molly, the defense did introduce the testimony of one witness, Dr. Friedman, and he contested the validity of those DNA results. However, his testimony was deemed as not reliable. And the defense took it even one step farther, claiming that in a struggle, the gun accidentally fired and killed Molly, and it was not an intentional homicide. Of course, the jury, they didn't buy any of this, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder as well as aggravated rape and aggravating circumstances. So on September 11th of 1998, he gets sentenced, and the jury recommended unanimously that Hoffman would be sentenced to death via lethal injection. So, as is the case, anytime you're convicted of pretty much anything, you're going to appeal. But especially when you're convicted of murder and convicted and sentenced to death, and Hoffman was no exception. He actually appealed his conviction and cited 18 points of error in his jury trial. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll give you a few. For one, he complained that the court made a mistake in denying his change of venue request. Another complaint he had was he said that his statements to the police should have been taken out because they took him into custody without, in his mind, probable cause. I mean, I don't know what he considers would be probable cause, but they had a fucking videotape of this guy at an ATM with a victim just prior to her death. I'd say that was pretty good probable cause. He also complained that 2 of the 3 African-American potential jurors were dismissed from the jury pool without giving sufficient race-neutral explanations. He even complained that the trial court did not have the right to introduce the videotape of the victim withdrawing money at that ATM. I mean, come on. And just a bunch of other ridiculous complaints that the court absolutely gets filled with every time there's a conviction, and just about every time it's bullshit, these complaints. Now, there are exceptions to that, as we all know, but this wasn't one of those cases. So on May 12th of 2000, the court denies Hoffman's application for a rehearing. But Hoffman wasn't given up that easy. He brings it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they deny his appeal. This was in October of 2000. So on July 20th of 2001, Hoffman then files an application for what's known as post-conviction relief with the state's district court. Guess what? That application was denied. And I go over all of this because I want you to see the picture of this guy exhausting every appeal opportunity he had. Now, in April of 2012, Hoffman files a lawsuit against Bloody Angola warden, Burl Cain. We've done an episode on Burl Cain. Go check that out. Actually, it was a mini-series of sorts. And he challenged his conviction and death sentence. And of course, none of that goes anywhere. And Hoffman at this point is just biding his time inside the wire. Then in April of 2022, a judge dismisses a nearly decade-old lawsuit against executions in Louisiana, saying there's nothing to challenge because the state can't even get the required drugs as medications. And this was a big deal, not only for Hoffman, but for everyone else that was sentenced to death, because from 2012 to this time in 2022, executions were completely halted during this lawsuit-filled time. Now, as I told you with the start of this one, in 2024, Jeff Landry became the new governor of the state of Louisiana. Very strong on crime, very tough. And one of his campaign promises was he was bringing back executions one way or the other. And he did just that, but with a little bit of a twist. Rather than lethal injection, which nobody can get the medicine for this, Louisiana no exception, Louisiana is now going to nitrogen hypoxia as a form of execution. And on February 10th of 2025, less than a month ago, Hoffman's death warrant is signed with an execution date, as I told you, of March 18th of 2025. Hoffman is now 47 years old. Now, a little bit about nitrogen hypoxia executions. Alabama is actually the only state thus far to carry out those type of executions, and they've done 4 of them since January of 2024. And a little history on Louisiana, the last execution there was in 2010, and that was the execution of Gerald Bordelon. So that's a wrap, right? March 18th is approaching. This guy has exhausted all his appeals, and now it's just a matter of time. Y'all know better than that. I'm going to reference an article for you quickly that came out just last week in the New Orleans Times-Picayune paper. And the headline reads, Louisiana death row inmate files lawsuit to block March 18th execution by nitrogen gas. Jessie Hoffman, the death row inmate who could be the first man in Louisiana put to death by nitrogen gas, filed a new lawsuit late Tuesday seeking to stop his March 18th execution. The suit challenges the state's newest method of execution, nitrogen gas, which state officials have informed Hoffman they intend to use to kill him. The filing marks the latest in a flurry of actions set off this month when Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry announced the state had readied its nitrogen gas execution protocols and had planned to resume executions after a 15-year hiatus. Within days, a St. Tammany Parish judge had signed Hoffman's execution warrant. Hoffman's attorneys have been fighting the decision in federal court ever since. Their latest lawsuit, filed in Louisiana's Middle District, says the state has refused to release the execution protocol to Hoffman, depriving him of his rights. It also claimed that executing Hoffman via nitrogen gas would violate the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, which forbids cruel and unusual punishment. Louisiana followed Alabama in endorsing nitrogen hypoxia last year as a method of execution. Alabama has executed 4 people to this date using the gas. Hoffman's attorneys pointed to witness accounts that paint a grim picture of suffering by those inmates in their final minutes. Quote, Louisiana's nitrogen gas protocol is completely untested and no court has a chance to review it. This from Cecilia Capel, an attorney for Hoffman. We haven't even been able to see the full protocol ourselves, with Jessie's execution set for just 3 weeks from now. Hoffman's legal team also requested a stay of Hoffman's execution. The new lawsuit appeared to land with U.S. District Judge Shelley Dick, the district's chief judge who last week reopened a long-dormant lawsuit. Hoffman and other death row inmates filed in 2012 over Louisiana's execution protocols. A federal appeals court panel swiftly stayed the ruling by Dick, an appointee of former President Barack Obama, while it weighs an opposition from Attorney General Liz Murrell. The panel of appeals court judges is comprised of Catherine Hayes, a nominee of George W. Bush, and two nominees of President Donald Trump, James Ho and Andrew Oldham. Quote, I expect the lawyers to eventually file this lawsuit, Murrell said Wednesday. That's the Attorney General. I have not had a chance to review it, so I cannot speak on the allegations, but I will vigorously oppose any attempts to delay carrying out justice under our law. Murrell's team also questioned Hoffman's tactics in federal court. They sent a letter Wednesday to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals saying in the light of Hoffman's new lawsuit being filed, the appeals court should order Dick to vacate a ruling that reopened the Hoffman's old suit. State Solicitor General J. Benjamin Aguinaga wrote that Hoffman's attempt to commandeer and moot lethal injection lawsuits brings a nitrogen challenge that is an extraordinary abuse of the law. Capel responded in a letter to the Fifth Circuit that said the new suit was necessary due to the exigent circumstances of the upcoming scheduled execution. Hoffman needs to ensure the opportunity to assert his constitutional rights before petitioners run out the clock. The article continues on and says it's been nearly 30 years since Hoffman committed the crime that landed him on death row. He was 18 years old and working as a parking attendant in New Orleans when he kidnapped 28-year-old Mary Molly Elliott on the night before Thanksgiving in 1996 as she walked back to her car in the New Orleans Central Business District. Hoffman took her to a remote area near the Pearl River where he raped, shot, and killed the advertising executive who was married and living near Covington. Hoffman's attorneys say he has had a, quote, transformation over the last 3 decades in prison and is respected by prison staff and fellow inmates alike and is focused on his faith. His attorneys this week applied for commutation, asking Landry for a reprieve in the meantime. Hoffman's attorneys acknowledged that he has exhausted all of his appeals. But Hoffman's case is the first time that Louisiana is expected to deploy nitrogen gas to put someone to death. Alabama is the first and only state so far to have executed inmates by the gas in the modern era. Alabama's first time using the gas as an execution method was in January of 2024 when the state put Kenneth Eugene Smith to death. News reports say that he thrashed violently and shook his head for about 2 minutes after the gas was administered. He then took gasping breaths. It took 10 minutes until he could no longer be seen visibly breathing. Since then, Alabama has executed 3 others by nitrogen gas: Alan Eugene Miller, Kerry Grayson, and Demetrius Frazier. Eyewitness accounts of the later executions describe prolonged deaths. It took 13 minutes for Frazier to die after gas began flowing into his system. During that time, Frazier twitched, shuddered, and appeared to struggle to breathe, the report said. And when Miller died by nitrogen gas, he shook on the gurney for about 2 minutes and periodically gulped for air for about 6 minutes before he went still. Hoffman seeks an alternative method. Hoffman is a devout Buddhist who practices faith for more than 2 decades, according to his legal team. He has attended Buddhist services on death row since they became available in 2018, his complaint said. His lawyers argue forcing him to breathe pure nitrogen would interfere with his Buddhist practices at his time of death. According to the Buddha, one must maintain contact with the breath in order to be mindful, the complaint says. Mr. Hoffman sincerely believes that he must practice breathing meditation at the most critical time of his transition between life and death. The lawsuit argues that the execution would violate federal law protecting religious freedoms. Boy, they're reaching. Hoffman's complaint suggested 2 alternate methods, which would be more humane than nitrogen hypoxia, though neither are legal in Louisiana. The first is execution by firing squad, which the lawsuit calls a known, available, and feasible alternative that will reduce pain and suffering. Some other states have legalized execution via firing squads, and a South Carolina inmate recently requested to be put to death via firing squad in his upcoming execution. The complaint also suggests the use of cocktail drugs known as DDMAPH. Those drugs can be used for physician-assisted suicide in states where it is legal. For more than 30 years, lethal injection was the state's only approved execution method. At Landry's behest, the state has added nitrogen hypoxia to that list last year, along with electrocution, which Louisiana had outlawed in 1991. Will we see a return of gruesome Gertie? So there you have it. And I'm going to keep you updated on where this appeal goes. I think it's going to go nowhere, this lawsuit rather. But I will keep you updated. And my only question is, I wonder how many times Miss Molly twitched when he put that bullet through her forehead and left her raped and dying in a dump in the middle of nowhere. That's all I got this week. Next week, I'm bringing you another one as we continue this series. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola.